demographic gaps that we know exist in schools, I wonder if that's all going to widen, if that's going to be an even more pronounced gap when students do go back to school in the fall. I mean, I think this has long-term implications, and we're just barely getting a sense of the short-term implications right now.
Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. And as we are all aware by now, it is certainly a unique time. The news changes not just by the day, but by the hour, and heck, by the minute. And here to help us sort through some of it is Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, Kevin, there's been a lot of updates of the last few days and hours, like I said. So we're going to try to avoid specific numbers and talking about things that happen just right now, because frankly, that could change. But one thing of a recent development is the change in the stay-at-home order from Governor Brad Little in Idaho. It was recently extended from ending on April 15th to April 30th. Talk about some of the dynamics that are going on in Idaho.
Well, what we've seen over the past 3 weeks is since Governor Little first instituted the stay-at-home order in late March, you've seen a couple of things happen. First of all, you've seen some sign that the coronavirus case numbers in Idaho, the increase has slowed down. There's a beginning sign towards maybe a flattening of the curve. But we're really only talking about a few days worth of data when you really think about it, and a very small sample. The governor has been able to point to a stay-at-home order having had some effect. But what's also happened over the past couple of weeks is that there's been a growing impatience over the idea of a stay-at-home order from within Governor Little's own political party. Fellow Republicans have become fairly impatient with the closures and fairly concerned about the implications for the economy. Governor Little points that out when he talks about the effects of the coronavirus, that it's a health crisis, but it's also an economic issue. He's trying to thread a pretty difficult political and public policy needle here in terms of trying to extend protections, but at the same time trying to be mindful of the economic ramifications and some of the criticism.
So his fellow Republicans have been giving him some pushback, not just the voters, but in state government. Can you talk about some of those people very high up, the Speaker of the House and his opponent in the 2018 election, Raul Labrador? What have they really been proposing and saying?
Well, House Speaker Scott Bedke sent a letter to Governor Little a few days ago, urging Little to step back from this process of doing a stay-at-home order and deferring to the 7 local health districts, let them decide what to do in terms of coronavirus. Let that decision be made at the local level. Not a lot of response from the governor. He has said, look, I have to do what I think is in the best interest of the state. I have to balance public health and economic considerations.
Moving on to your bailiwick, if you might say, in education. So as many states have, Idaho closed schools. Of course, Washington and Oregon did statewide a little bit sooner than Idaho had, but now they're pretty much done for the rest of the year. For the most part, there is some exceptions there around Idaho based on some district policies. So I'm just curious, though, not just necessarily in terms of the schools closing and for how long they will be, but how they're going to plan to meet the educational needs for these students long term for the next at least several weeks, if not months, and maybe who knows into the next school year from a distance learning perspective. Obviously, lots of Idaho and other states have a lot of rural areas and maybe not as much access, heck, any access to broadband internet. What is the state and then some of the local districts planning to do to frankly fill in those gaps so the kids can actually do distance learning?
Well, right now, the state's overriding policy on education heading into these final few weeks of the school year is maximizing flexibility and minimizing requirements. The state has issued waiver upon waiver upon waiver. What we're seeing with the school districts right now is they are having to try to roll something out very quickly, trying to figure out how to get educational materials into the hands of students, first of all. Not every student can access the internet. Not every student has a device at home that they can use. 115 school districts in the state, more than 50 charter schools, and some are more urban, some are more suburban. A lot of school districts with high levels of poverty, so students who may not have access to a computer at home, access to home internet. Even if it's available in their communities, it may just not be something that their families can afford. You have some schools trying to set up hotspots in their parking lots. It's really interesting how the schools are still, to some degree, still performing that function as sort of a community hub, whether it's providing a hotspot for students who need to get online, or whether it's providing a place for students and parents to pick up lunches or breakfasts, which is a big deal in a state like Idaho, where almost half of the students are eligible for some sort of a lunch subsidy, some sort of a federal meal subsidy.
And I'm curious, though, about, since you cover education, what you might have been hearing about not necessarily the delivery of those sorts of services, but kind of the long-term effects, whether there is people who are worried about learning outcomes, about people falling behind in their education because of this sudden change and this environment. Of course, distance learning is nothing new, but suddenly have everyone do it, and those students who might not have been prepared to do it, are they worried about some of the long-term effects on their educational outcomes?
I think that's a real worry, and I think that's something that's really hard to measure. Assuming that the schools can reopen in August and September and go back to normal, you're going to have kids coming into schools who haven't been there in 5 or 6 months. What kind of retention will those students have? What kind of catch up will the schools have to play with those students? You also have to look long term at how does this affect the demographic gaps that we already see in education, not just in Idaho, all over the country. The demographic gaps, when you think about students who are in lower income households, students who maybe are a single parent household, English language learners, special needs students, so all of those demographic gaps that we know exist in schools, I wonder if that's all going to widen, if that's going to be an even more pronounced gap when students do go back to school in the fall. I mean, I think this has long-term implications, and we're just barely getting a sense of the short-term implications right now. I think education scholars will spend the next 20 to 25 years studying what happened this spring and how it affected students from here and beyond. I mean, it's a project for scholars, and it's a project for education journalists.
And a lot of that scholarship will be happening at the research level at colleges and universities.
Yes.
So I'm wondering what you have reported on about some of the potential implications for higher education institutions.
Well, here too, we're talking about short-term implications and long-term implications. In the short term, schools in Idaho, like colleges and universities all over the country, are in a real cash flow crisis because the coronavirus has affected revenue that's coming in, and it's affecting expenses that the colleges and universities are incurring. I mean, it's everything from, if you send your students home for the semester, you have to refund their room and board. You don't have revenue coming in from campus events, from the bookstore, from parking, all these things that sound fairly trivial, they do add up. They are part of the bottom line. And you have the added expense of trying to make sure that you're delivering online education and making sure that staff and students are fully equipped to learn in this new environment. A couple of numbers, Lewis Clark State College up in Lewiston, they peg that the immediate losses tied to coronavirus are somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million for a college with about a $37 million annual budget. So this is not an insignificant sum of money. University of Idaho, they're pegging the immediate loss somewhere in the $7 million range. And these are schools, especially University of Idaho, that's already been dealing with a shortfall and has already been dealing with budget cuts imposed at the state level. That's just the short term. When you hear the university presidents and the college presidents talk about the fall, I wouldn't say it's panic, but it is deep concern. It's close to panic. And the concern that they have is they don't have any idea what kind of student enrollment to expect in the fall, because they don't know what they'll be able to do in the fall. They don't know what kind of learning model they'll be able to deliver in August. And there's a concern that students are going to be apprehensive about committing to going to college, to going on a campus. I mean, I think we can all relate. I mean, I'm not making any plans for August. I'm not making any plans for travel or a vacation or anything like that. So stands to reason that students are going to be concerned about making a commitment to attending a college in August. So, Usually in a downturn, colleges can count on an increase in enrollment. More adult students and traditional age college students all deciding that their best bet is to go to college, improve their educational credentials and be ready for the economy when it rebounds. That's the way it usually works in a downturn, but nobody knows what it's going to do in this downturn. I mean, some of Idaho's colleges and universities have already been dealing with enrollment challenges, and now they're wondering what to expect in the long term. Even Boise State, which has had significant enrollment growth, they're not sure what to expect.
Well, I've heard it said about this time that there are little, medium, and big fires burning everywhere that we have to watch out for, and you are helping us keep watch of all the fires going on all around us. Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You can see more of Kevin's reporting on these and other topics at idahoednews.org. And for more Northwest news, you can come to our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.